nor is it to be thought that man is either the oldest or the last of earth's masters, or that the common bulk of life and substance walks alone. The old ones were, the old ones are, and the old ones shall be. Not in the spaces we know them, but between them. They walk serene and primal, undimensioned and to us unseen. As a foulness shall ye know them. Man rules now where they ruled once. They shall soon rule where man rules now. After summer is winter, and after winter summer. They wait patient and potent, for here shall they rule again. That was an excerpt from the Necronomicon by the mad Arab Abdul al-Azrad, and it was partly the inspiration for the elusive Call of Cthulhu campaign that I am on and off running, entitled The Changing of the Seasons, which comes from that last little bit where it talks about after summer is winter and after winter summer. The idea that everything changes, everything has its time, and some things come back round again. The idea had originally occurred to me several years ago, because I've got quite a reasonable collection of Call of Cthulhu source material and scenarios, and I had wanted to do a huge campaign, pretty much take all the best scenarios I've got and link them somehow into a single 10-year campaign from beginning to end, January 1920 to January 1930. Well, I suppose technically that's 10, 11 years. And so I sat down about 4 or 5 years ago and I actually worked it all out. I wrote them down, and I had got myself 5 players to start. We're going back 2009, 10, yeah, it must have been 2009, and they were brought together by their association with a gentleman who was dying of cancer. This is early January 1920. They only knew him as either a distant family member, or it was somebody that they knew through work, that sort of thing. They had no connection to each other in any other way, and he brought them together because of a rather unbelievable story that he told them, where many years ago in his youth at Miskatonic University, because the campaign is initially based in Arkham, all the characters are from Arkham, in his youth he and some of his fellow students had done what so many students at Miskatonic seem to do, which is kind of get an interest in the occult, and had attempted to see what they could conjure up. And so, having obtained a small cottage on the edges of Dulwich, they had set about to reach the barriers between worlds and summon up a spirit of some sort. Unfortunately, what they got was a little bit more than they could handle. One man was killed, another driven insane, and the others managed to seal the thing into the house, into the cottage, before fleeing back to Arkham and never speaking of this again. Well, unfortunately, slowly every single one of them has died, until this particular gentleman is the last one left, and he fears that upon his death, whatever they set up to imprison it will fall, and this thing will be leashed upon the world. And he wants people he can trust to ensure that that doesn't happen. And that's how the initial campaign started. And I had said to the players that there is an overarching plot, but it's very much a monster of the week show because of the way the scenarios are built and everything else. I kind of suggested it a little bit like the first season of Supernatural, really. As they went along, they learnt that something unpleasant was happening. Even some of the not so malevolent mythos races, such as some ghouls that they encountered, a ghoul warren, were fleeing into the Dreamlands because something was coming, something that even they were afraid of. And eventually, they learnt that. Well, they learnt through a strange, somewhat mad old man named Laban Shrewsbury that a conspiracy existed, run by what everyone thought was a regular sort of like gentleman's club across Europe and North America, called the Order of the Silver Twilight. It was in fact a front for a cult led by an immortal sorcerer by the name of Carl Stanford, who sought to awaken these ancient beings, these great old ones now to gods, release them from their prisons, and basically cause destruction upon the earth. Now these things are meant to be, it's thousands of years from now before they ever actually are meant to escape from their prisons or whatever. But he wanted to ensure that it happened by the end of the decade. And Shrewsbury basically set them up as a kind of cell, I suppose. And he said that there were a few others around the world that he had organised. Things seemed to go along relatively smoothly. They never had any major defeats or anything, and they were able to stop what little mythos activity they encountered. Because one of the things that Laban said to them to keep them together and focused was that once you have looked into this world, once you have looked into the mythos, it can look back and see you. So, it's one of these things, you can't just go back to your normal life, because you will start spotting things that would have seemed pointless or irrelevant. Now you'll start seeing things that are obviously related to what's going on. But it was at the end of 1920, as we went along, and there's about 6, maybe 7 scenarios a year, not a month, that would be a bit bizarre, a year. And I got to the end of 1920 and they had a scenario that involved a manifestation of the outer god Nyarlathotep, who is a major villain in this. He's kind of the force of chaos in the universe, as it were, and he is, I'm loath to say working with, more like manipulating Carl Stanford to ensure that this scheme to bring about the return of the Ancient Ones by the end of the decade actually happens. And this particular manifestation of Nyarlathotep was called the Effigy of Hate, and it could be summoned up, and if the right sacrifices and things were made, it could undo one event in somebody's life, in their past. So it kind of rewrites history almost. And unfortunately we were unable to stop this particular nutter from achieving his end. And so he was wiped out of existence, which is what he wanted. He wanted to die. He was a veteran of the Civil War, and he wanted to. He was a coward. The rest of his men had died assaulting a row of cannons. He'd basically got knocked out. When he woke up, he sort of hurt himself to make it look like he'd suffered an injury and was the only survivor. And would have been awarded medals for bravery and all sorts of things. And in his waning years, he wanted to undo that and die with the rest of his men, which is what happened. However, the effigy, being a manifestation of Nyarli, actually used that opportunity to rewrite time itself to ensure that events would change and things would start happening by the end of the decade. We had an interesting point at this stage in the campaign, because we had lost one of the original characters, Arkham Police Detective Frank Brady. He had unfortunately been devoured by a child of Yog-Sothoth about 3 scenarios earlier, and the replacement character had been a chemist at the university. And I know the player wasn't particularly happy with the chemist, so what we did was I spoke to him and gave him this idea, and we went along with it. And when Gnarly rewrote time to ensure what he wanted, it had the unforeseen side effect of having Brady not die. So instead, the chemist disappears, and in his place is Frank Brady, who has all the knowledge and experience of what had gone on in the interim of his death, as it were. And everybody else was aware that he shouldn't be here, but he is, because he should be. And sanity loss. So Brady was brought back, and has been a major character ever since. Pardon me. As I've gone along, they've had some encounters with the Silver Twilight. They've since learned that Silver Twilight also manipulates other cults around the world, specifically one called the Dark Brotherhood or the Black Brotherhood, depending on who they're talking to about it, which is a major cult of Nyarlathotep. And at this particular point in the campaign, we are up to we come up to the end of 1924, and things are beginning to roll. The earlier scenarios have been fairly simple things. It's been one-off episodes, or it's been something to do with Silver Twilight, and they're beginning to run up to the scenarios where they will encounter the major events. We have had some problems though. The game has been on and off. We were playing fortnightly because not everyone can make a weekly game session, which is fair enough because half the players were coming from out of town. But we got to a point where two of them, who are really good role players, they're really good, no problem with that, but they got to a point where I had the other players coming to me and saying, when did the nature of this game change? They're not really getting this anymore. And they had got to a point where they were seeing, once they encountered the bad guys, whether it was a cult or it was a one scenario, it was just whoever or whatever, they were not fully investigating. They would just, they would see who was about, see who was who, see who they thought was probably the villain, and then they would kill them, or they would dynamite the house or whatever, and they weren't investigating, they weren't finding the clues. And unfortunately that means that some of the later scenarios to come up are going to be slightly harder because they didn't get things that have been placed for later on. And I'm not entirely sure why this changed. I have a feeling it's because the nature of Cthulhu as a campaign, I think, is very different from something like D&D. In D&D, if you're doing the Dungeon of Doom and you've done so many levels and suddenly you think, well, hang on, we've heard rumours of something else, let's go and investigate that. You can do a side quest. You can go off and the characters can fight monsters and they can find this magic weapon or whatever. They can come back, they can carry on what they're doing. In Cthulhu, you don't get that because it might be, right, let's do some research. Our downtime will be studying in the library. And it might be that they hear something of a house or a person or something, but you couldn't necessarily write a scenario about it because unlike D&D, they're not just going to be able to walk into a house on the edge of Boston or whatever and find monsters and fight monsters and get treasure and what have you. It would be an empty house. So pretty much things like that are, for me, downtime in Call of Cthulhu. And I think this was kind of in contrast to what they or how they normally play and what they normally do. It also had a slight change because one of those players, in one particular scenario, found that she was the, I suppose reincarnation is the proper word, reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian priestess of the goddess Bast, who's one of the elder gods. And so she decided to pick up on this, and her character basically became this priestess of Bast. She's got some Bast-related spells. The house that they have became a sanctuary for stray cats. And at one point, when the Silver Twilight started picking off the various cult cells, that Shrewsbury had set up, they were one of only a couple that survived because the presence of all these cats and the being a temple essentially of Bast, the big bads didn't want to get anywhere near it. And now only two cells remain, basically. That particular one, and survivors from another one led by a man named Jackson Elias, who, if you know the Masks of Nyarlathotep campaign, which is coming up in 1925, you'll know that he's a character right from the very beginning of that. And we haven't played for about a year now, because I think the length of the campaign wasn't quite what these two players were also looking for. I don't think they quite grasped the concept of it, and so I think they were getting a bit antsy, and so we had a break, and they're running the different game, a Dark Heresy game. But I've had another group of players who are interested in carrying it on. So the player of Brady has joined in that, and they've picked up essentially where the campaign left off. So he's imparted his knowledge. They have saved the world from a larval great old one that was attempting to break through from the dreamlands into the physical world. And they have spoken to Shrewsbury, who has explained that he's going to set them up as this new cell, a third cell. Because Brady is concerned that even though the other group is a cult of Bast, it's still a cult, and he doesn't trust them. And Shrewsbury can understand that. The Elder Gods are just as bad. You know, just because they're supposedly neutral, the good guys, doesn't mean they actually are. And so he has set them up, and if Brady can make if the player of Brady can make these particular sessions, we'll carry on with him. If not, then he can join in whenever he gets the opportunity, and I'll carry on with this new group who seem very interested in carrying on with the game. So that's pretty much my Call of Cthulhu campaign idea in a nutshell, where they're up to at the moment. We are coming up to the end of 1924. They are currently, at this particular point, in the middle of a scenario. We're investigating a dig site out in Dulwich. One of the Miskatonic University professors has uncovered an ancient Native American site. And has unwittingly released something that was imprisoned there centuries before, something extremely malevolent and unpleasant. And so they're having to have to try and find out what this is and stop it, and that's pretty much where we're up to. Hopefully the game will carry on, and because I've been wanting to run this whole 10-year thing for a while now, and it's been a good game. You might also get the impression, I'm not as much as I love Lovecraft and I love his writings and I love the mythos concept, I love the whole mankind is irrelevant, the universe is irrelevant, it's just what is. I don't think that translates well into a role-play game. I much prefer my games to be a bit more pulp, I suppose, as opposed to purist Lovecraftian. Anyway, I hope that has been of some interest. I apologise for the light as well. It's a rather bright and sunny day and it does interfere with the camera a little bit. But anyway, thank you for watching, and any question or anything, just feel free to ask. Until next time, take care and good gaming.